Hey folks, so over the weekend I attended the Secular Social Justice Conference in Washington, D.C. It was a really fantastic experience. It was this past Saturday, April 7th, from about 9 a.m. to a little bit after 5:30 or so. We had a little bit of a delay in the middle of the day because lunch was late. That was the only hiccup all day, was that lunch was a little bit late being delivered, so we had to put lunch off, and a few of the talks went a little bit long, so the whole day wound up being a little bit longer than it was scheduled for, but I really don't think anyone minded. It was such a energizing and recharging and rejuvenating event. If you've paid any attention with any sort of regularity to my videos over the last really couple of years, you have heard me complain what sometimes probably feels endlessly about the shortcomings in the atheist movement and the bad actors in the atheist movement and the people who have failed to show up for important things in the atheist movement, and the people who have blown really easy responses to things like MythCon and like the Lawrence Krauss sex abuse allegations and other things sort of in those veins. And I would not blame anyone for being even more disillusioned with the movement overall than I have been. There's a lot in the atheist movement, particularly in the mainstream, high-profile segment of the atheist movement, and of course also here on YouTube, which has been a complete shit show for years in general and in terms of atheist and secular content. Can't blame anybody for wanting to throw up their hands and just say to hell with this whole thing, it's not worth it. And I have certainly been in that headspace quite a bit. But secular social justice was a prime example of the segment of the atheist movement that is worth supporting, that is worth hanging on to, that is worth finding out more about if you are unfamiliar with the event, with the organizations behind it, with the people who spoke. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience at Secular Social Justice this past weekend, and hopefully it will encourage some of you who are maybe in the same spot that I am in terms of feeling discouraged and disillusioned with the atheist movement in general. It will give you some of the same encouragement and some of the same motivation that it gave me. The big difference between secular social justice and a more typical mainstream atheist or secular conference that I perceived is that the Secular Social Justice Conference was not trying to flatter the audience. It was not trying to pat the audience on the back. There was none of that masturbatory, self-congratulatory stuff that goes on at a lot of atheist secular conferences, even the relatively good ones. There's just a lot of glad handing and a lot of, oh, isn't it great that we're atheists, and isn't it great that we have seen through all of that religious mumbo jumbo and we're the smart ones and we're the ones that have it all figured out. Secular social justice is not about that. It was about challenging us. And by us, I mean those of us who were sitting in the audience watching this array of fantastic speakers throughout the day. It was about challenging us. It was about making us aware of the distance that we still have to travel and giving us tips on how to cross that distance and what directions we should be going as we try to cross that distance. It wasn't about saying, hey, good on you guys, great job. It was about saying, since you're here, and since you care about these issues, and since you're interested, since you've paid your hard-earned money to come here and listen to us and absorb the information that we're giving you, here's what we want you to know, and here's what we hope you will do with this information. It was a reminder to me, a very welcome reminder to me, that even though it doesn't get a lot of attention in the mainstream of the atheist movement, there is an activist wing of this movement. There are people in the atheist community, the secular skeptical community, whatever you want to call it, however you want to reckon the various circles there overlap. There are people who care deeply, passionately about racial justice, economic justice, gender equality, equality and fair treatment for LGBTQ people, for people with disabilities, for immigrants, for all kinds of marginalized, overlooked groups that exist within the atheist community just as they exist elsewhere, everywhere in our society. There are those people from those groups and those who seek to be allies to those groups in atheism who are trying to make things better, who are trying to use the atheist movement to do something positive. And the thing about secular social justice was, because I talk a lot about wanting to make the atheist community better, wanting to make the atheist movement more inclusive, more broadly representative, more equal, more fair, more just, safer, more welcoming, all of these things. I talk about wanting to improve and fix the atheist community. And secular social justice did not focus on that. It focused on motivating and energizing and mobilizing atheists, secular people, whatever label we identify by, to make the world a better place, to charge up the atheist movement and say, let's not only improve our own circles, let's go out and let's make things better for everybody. Let's fight injustice wherever we find it, not just within the atheist community. Let's fight inequality wherever we find it, not just in the atheist community. Let's fight back against white supremacy and male supremacy and nationalism and all of these other toxic isms and ideologies and systems that are in place that are holding people back and holding people down and harming people. Let's go after these things wherever we find them, wherever we see them, not just in atheist circles. And if you can improve conditions in those areas everywhere, it will improve conditions for people in the atheist community as well. That was one of the issues that was brought up fairly early. One of the first talks, I think it was Diane Burkholder, who was one of the first speakers, who talked about how frustrating it can be when you are wanting, as an atheist, wanting to speak about social issues, wanting to speak about political issues at secular conferences. And often organizers will say, well, how is this a secular issue? And having to convince people that it's a secular issue because secular people live in the same country, in the same society, are subject to the same rules, are dependent upon or pressed down upon by the same systems and institutions as everybody else. And if you want to make the world a better place, if you want to improve your society, that should matter just as much to you as a secular person as it should to people who are from various religious backgrounds. And if we have a whole bunch of people together, and we've all gathered together to listen to people and to be informed and to be motivated, and I mean, we're here, we're at a conference, whether it's a secular conference or whatever the underlying reason for the conference is, why not talk about these issues? Why not tell people what they need to know, maybe what they don't already know? Why not give people a roadmap as to what they can do if they care about these issues that we're talking about? How can they make things better? If you follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, you saw me tweeting a lot of stuff out under the Secular Social Justice Conference hashtag, and I would browse it from time to time throughout the day. And one of the things I noticed was that there were a few trolls, there were a few people who were coming into the hashtag on Twitter to try and start shit or to sea lion and to ask a lot of what seemed like kind of blockheaded questions, perhaps disingenuous questions. And there was one particular person, I don't remember what their handle was or who they were, I wasn't familiar with them, but they said, following this secular social justice conference hashtag reminds me of why I'm not a liberal anymore. This is why I've moved to the center, I presume, or to the right, whatever. And they say it's because of the things that are being said at this secular social justice conference. And you just follow the hashtag and you can tell that it's just a bunch of anti-white racism. That's all they're talking about at this secular social justice conference. It's just a bunch of anti-white racism. As a white person who was there with a lot of other white people, there was a lot of diversity in the audience. There were a lot of people who were people of color, who were from various different backgrounds. But there were also a lot of white people there. There were probably more white people there than there were members of any other racial group, at least from what I could tell. I didn't conduct a survey or anything. There were plenty of white people there. And as one of those white people, I never felt like I was being attacked in any sort of malicious way. I felt like I was being challenged. I felt like in certain cases, maybe I was being called in or perhaps even called out for attitudes that I may have exhibited, or for attitudes or behaviors that, whether I exhibit them personally or not, are fairly common among white people. There was some of that. There was a lot of talk about white supremacy. There was a lot of talk about ways in which white people in general, on average, could do better in engaging with these issues or engaging with black people or brown people, just as there was talk of how men could do a better job in engaging with women, or in how cis people could do a better job of engaging and helping and being allies to trans people, and various other forms of privileged people doing a better job at handling issues that primarily affect disadvantaged or non-privileged people. There was a lot of that, but there was no attacking of white people, or of men, or of cis people, or of whatever privileged group you want to specify. There wasn't any of that. And the fact that a few people who weren't even there, who didn't even actually see the talks, responded to what they saw people tweeting out with, oh, it's just a bunch of anti-white racism, is very telling to me. Whenever you see people who respond to activists, especially people of color or women, or activists who themselves are from marginalized communities, speaking out against privileges that benefit white people or men or cis people or whomever. The fact that some people in those challenged groups, in those called out privileged groups, respond by saying, oh, this is just because you hate people like me, that's very telling. And unfortunately, it's suggestive of how close-minded that person is, and of how little that person cares about the issues affecting the marginalized person who is speaking out, about the challenges they and people like them, people in their community face. And that's sad. That's one of the things that makes progress such a long and difficult road. So it was an eye-opening conference, and it was educational to me, and it was a reminder to me, and sort of a well-needed, well-appreciated boot in the ass to me, and I imagine to many of the other folks in that room as well, particularly the white folks, that as woke as we think we are, as much as we may flatter ourselves and think of ourselves as being educated, engaged people on these social issues, that there's still things we need to either learn for the first time or be reminded of. A recurring theme throughout the day, which is something that I try to keep in mind often on my own, but is something that I always appreciate being reminded of, is the notion that you don't get to declare yourself an ally. An ally is something that other people define you as, based on how you live, based on your actions, based on your track record, based on you proving yourself as being someone that they can count on. Really count on, someone who will really show up in a meaningful way. You don't get to raise your hand and declare yourself that. That's something that other people decide that you are. White people don't get to decide who the allies of black people are. Men don't get to decide who the true allies of women are. Cis people don't get to decide who the allies of trans people are. Hetero people don't get to decide who the allies of gay people are. It just doesn't work that way. And that's a defense that people, privileged people, people who fancy ourselves allies, that's an excuse that we throw out a lot when people challenge us or criticize us or call us out for something that we've said or done. We say, wait a minute, you can't, if you're attacking me, you're missing the point. I'm an ally. I'm not the enemy. People say that a lot. And atheists who fancy themselves allies, who fancy themselves the good guys, when they are called out for their shortcomings or for their mistakes, instead of looking inward and realizing that maybe they fucked up and they should have done something differently and apologizing and trying to change and do better in the future. Instead of that, they will pull out their ally card. They will start pulling out all of their credentials, and they'll be like, but I'm one of the good guys. You shouldn't be attacking me. I'm an ally. And you don't get to do that. You don't get to declare yourself an ally. That's something for others to do. The people that you seek to ally yourselves with, they get to decide whether they consider you an ally or not. It's something you have to earn. And it's something you have to keep earning on and on and on. And that theme of having to continue with things, throughout your life, having to keep going because you never reach an end goal. There's never a point where you become an ally and you're just safe, and no matter what you do now, you're in the club. You have to constantly work and prove yourself and show yourself to be worthy of that status. And there was something in one of the last talks, I think the last presentation of the day, which was a talk between Whitney Shepard and Tracy Redd, and Samrina Faruqi, who was sort of their facilitator. Whitney Shepard said that liberation is practice. Liberation is not something that you do and then it's done and it's over and you don't have to do it anymore. Dismantling white supremacy, for instance, is a job that will never be done. We will never free ourselves of it as individuals, no matter who we are, whether we're white people who benefit from a system or you are a person of color who is harmed by the system, by the existence of white supremacy. It's not something that will ever be completed in ourselves or in our society. It's something that we always will constantly have to be working at. But that doesn't mean that things can't improve, and it doesn't mean that the work itself is pointless. If anything, it makes the work more important and more urgent, and it makes it even more vital that we are able to recognize the areas in which we ourselves need to change and need to improve, and remind ourselves of how we need to be critical of ourselves and be thoughtful and receptive to criticism from others about our behavior and our attitudes. It's an ongoing process. It never stops. And that's just the nature of it. It's the nature of society. It's the nature of these problems, and it must be the nature of our responses to them. And then after the conference was over, and the conference itself was wonderful and educational and eye-opening and inspiring and challenging and all of the things I had hoped it would be before I went. Afterwards, I got to hang out with some awesome people who were also there. Stephanie Zvan and Manette Richards and Greta Christina and Ingrid Nelson, Greta's wonderful wife. PZ Myers I got to meet. Most of these people I was meeting in person for the first time. And Debbie Goddard, who I got to see, who's been a Facebook friend of mine for a while and I've never met before. We didn't get to spend a lot of time together. We just kind of met in the lobby afterwards and said hi for a few minutes. But it was awesome to meet her. Josiah Mannion, who was taking pictures the whole time. And he's only posted a few of his photographs of the event so far as of this recording, but I can't wait to see the others because every time Josiah photographs an event, it's just fantastic. He's just an amazing photographer. And I got to hang out with a lot of really cool people, and people that I didn't mention as well were there. It was a big group of us went out afterwards and hung out for a while, and it was just a wonderful evening. It was a wonderful day of learning and of education and of motivation and inspiration and activism. And then afterwards, a bunch of us got together and got to hang out and spend time together, and it was just wonderful. We had ourselves a little outrage brigade meeting. It was a really, really wonderful day, and it's the kind of day that I would love to have more often, and the kind of event that I think the atheist community could benefit from having more of, and from having more attention paid to. And this list of speakers at Secular Social Justice, I mentioned a few of them already, but of course Sikivu Hutchinson, who was the founder of the event and gave the opening remarks and is just brilliant. If you haven't read her book Moral Combat, I highly recommend it. Jessica Shao, who was the MC for the day and also had her own statements and responses to some of the speakers throughout the day, who is just brilliant and is wonderful. I mentioned already Diane Burkholder and Ashton Woods. Ashton was the first speaker of the day. He and Diane sort of, took turns doing. They each did half of a presentation for the first segment. Ashton is just brilliant. He's fantastic. Nazgul Gandnush, Victoria Rodriguez Ralden, Juam Navarro Rivera, who was brilliant and talked about immigration justice. Gowrie Kay, who is a poet who did a fantastic job reading some of her poetry, actually reciting poetry, which was fantastic. Rajani Gudlavaletti, who talked about the war on drugs and was, again, just a fantastic speaker and a really informative presentation. Candace Gorham, who talked about the school to prison pipeline and was hilarious. Really just a very funny, biting presentation for such a serious and depressing issue. I loved it. It was one of my favorite presentations of the whole day. She's fantastic. And then Tracy Redd, who talked about activism and protesting and how to better be a more effective protester, and he talked about the Howard University protest that was ongoing. And then there was again the aforementioned talk with Whitney Shepard and Tracy Redd and Samrina Faruqi. And any mainstream atheist conference that wanted to invite any or all of the speakers that I saw at Secular Social Justice to speak in prominent slots at their convention or their conference would be immeasurably improved by the inclusion of these folks. These are the kinds of voices that should be listened to, that should be amplified, that should be sought out, that should be given center stage in the atheist community. And it's something that Diane Burkholder actually mentioned in her talk, with the idea, the necessity really of establishing a leadership pipeline, so that we're not just listening to the same people over and over and over again, year after year after year, at conference after conference after conference, that there is new blood being infused into the community constantly. And it's so important. It's something that we haven't really been all that good at in the atheist community. There are a lot of people who are invited to conferences who headline or are among the prominent speakers year after year after year after year. And that is a recipe for stagnation. However talented and worthwhile and worthy those people may be, the fact that they continue to take up all the oxygen in the room year after year after year at every major event is a problem in the long run. It keeps the movement from changing and evolving and moving forward and featuring new voices and empowering different segments of the community. It's something that we really should do a better job at. And events like Secular Social Justice are an important part of that, and an important model that we can follow, and an example that maybe can be emulated for the movement in a larger sense. I would love to see that happen. Speaking of events like Secular Social Justice, one final note here at the end of the video. This weekend, there is an online conference being held. It's the OrbitCon, which is being hosted by the Orbit blog network. And it's in a similar vein to Secular Social Justice. A lot of the issues being addressed will be similar to the ones addressed in DC this past Saturday. But this is a 3-day convention. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it's completely online. All of the panels, all of the talks, all of the events will be viewable online on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description of this video to the schedule for OrbitCon this weekend, and I want to mention specifically that on Sunday at starting at noon Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Central Time, I will be participating in one of the events. I will be sitting on a panel along with the wonderful and brilliant Dr. Christy Winters, and also Chrisiosity will be there, and Ina, the host of the excellent Polite Conversations podcast, and we're going to be talking about how to find progressive voices, progressive atheist voices, the challenges in finding good progressive atheist YouTubers and podcasters and bloggers, etc. And that's going to be a really awesome panel. So you can watch us on Sunday at noon as a part of OrbitCon. And again, check out the schedule that is linked in the description of this video, and find the other events that look interesting to you, that feature people that you want to see, because it's a really, really stacked lineup. It's really amazing. And again, completely online conference. So you don't have to buy a ticket. You don't have to travel. You can just sit in front of your computer or on your phone or your TV or wherever you watch YouTube videos and watch OrbitCon in the comfort of wherever you happen to be. It's going to be a really wonderful event. So again, check out the schedule that is linked in the description box of this video. See what particular talks or panels are of special interest to you, and maybe watch a few of them. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, OrbitCon. It's going to be wonderful. Once again, just like Secular Social Justice, it's, I think, an example of the sort of event and the featuring of the kinds of voices and talking about the kinds of issues that I would love to see the atheist community in general embrace a lot more fully and a lot more enthusiastically. It's been a tremendously motivating and encouraging last few days for me to be reminded that there is this very enthusiastic, very determined, very hardworking activist wing of the atheist community that is trying its damnedest to make sure that this community and this movement is for some good in this world.